from a person who has some scientific foothold and foundation, it's safe to say that the idea of flushing your plant at the end to get rid of chlorophyll and to get rid of these
Yeah,
chemicals in your buds is just
no,
bullshit, right?
that's bullshit. Yeah.
Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin.
This is very real.
Fantastic.
This drug is dangerous.
Wrong.
You cannot play with it. It's not funny. It's not something to laugh about. Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Shut your little punk ass up.
But the more you hate me, the more you will learn.
Hey, you guys, welcome to the Autoflower podcast, where we chat with growers, breeders, and anyone relevant to the Autoflower cannabis community. My name is Chad. I'm 40 years old, slightly overweight, and extremely addicted to coffee. I'm also your host, and I want to thank you for tuning in. I really do appreciate your ears. I want to give a shout out and welcome new Patreon supporters, Omer, Travis, Concerned Okie, Joey, and Autoflower Ninja. I hope I get these names right when I pronounce them all the time. Thank you guys so much for signing up, and welcome to the community. On this episode, we are tackling a few questions that were submitted to Dr. MJ Coco. I went ahead and sent all the questions over to him and let him decide which ones he thought would be good for our time together, being that he's the one who has to answer them, and he's really thorough and he knows his own system of things. So one of them I'm super excited about. It's a bit controversial, but you might know what it is based on the intro. But anyways, I don't want to spoil too much. Before we get started, I do want to give you an update. I've been staying with my grandmother as a caretaker for the last 2 weeks, and I may be here for a bit. She's bedbound, and she needs 24-hour care. She was in a physical therapy rehab after a visit to the hospital from the fall a few weeks ago, and this rehab most definitely does not have their shit together, and in my opinion, she wasn't being cared for properly. But long story short, we fought to get her home where she is now. Hospice has come to aid my aunt and I as we care for her full time, as she just finishes her journey here. So episodes may pop up here and there, and my social media presence may be less than usual, but I'm still here, and I do plan on keeping everything running. And I just want to thank you for all the enormous amount of support that I've received. It's just poured in, just on social media and on Patreon. You guys are the best community to produce a podcast for, and I really, really value the friendships and love that I've been the recipient of. So thank you. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation. Grab your notepad and a cup of coffee. It's going to be a good one, man. Please welcome back to the Autoflower podcast, Dr. MJ Coco. And what you've got coming up in your world and how you been?
So we've got the New Year's Grow Challenge coming up. It's always going to be our biggest challenge, our biggest grow challenge of the year. We do 3 challenges of the year, but the New Year's Grow Challenge is always the biggest. Last year, we had over 400 growers sign up. This year, we have already got over 200, and it's still just the middle of November. I'm expecting us to shoot past 500 here for sure before it all starts. So we're going to have quite a big collection of growers. Everybody is going to start growing. The idea is on January 1st, but, we're a little bit flexible about that. To drop seeds on January 1st, we're going to do giveaways and different prizes for like best journals, best gromies, stuff like that during the event. We're all going to try to flip to flower around Valentine's Day. One of the cool things that we're doing in this challenge, so we have, with like 500, 600, 700 growers, we have them organized into groups, and we put together a menu for this New Year's Grow Challenge. So we have like the dessert group, which is for people growing strains like candy and cake and anything sweet. We've got the color diet group if you're growing anything with a color in the name. We've got the global cuisine group if you're growing anything with like place name, New England rock candy I might grow, which is a place name, or like Afghan cherries or something like that. We've got the misfits and the potluck group. So a bunch of different groups based on, what strains you're going to be growing. All kind of organized loosely around like a food menu feast theme. And then as our side challenge, we like to do kind of like a stunt side challenge. We're going to do a 1 cola challenge. So this is growing 1 plant with only 1 cola. You're not allowed to top the plant, and you have to trim all of the lateral branches off of the plant such that it ends up with just one cola. That's going to be
I like that.
A fun grow to figure out how to keep it in the tent and sort of see what kind of Instagram worthy colas we get out of that. But yeah, no, the New Year's Grow Challenge, we're getting all geared up for that. So it's the big thing in our community sort of coming up right now.
That's too cool, man. I like that, the single cola challenge. That sounds really fun, actually.
Yeah, we're doing the party cup challenge in the current grow challenge that we're doing. The party cup challenge is you just got to keep your one plant in a party cup up to 18 ounces all the way through. That's been a lot of fun. We have 2 groups of party cup growers, though. We have those of us that have automated our watering. So I have my party cup plant gets watered automatically 9 times a day, which keeps my party cup plant actually really happy. I have a happy little partier in there. And then we have the hand watering group, who every time they talk about their party cup plants are like, man, it's cool, but I wish I didn't have to water so much. I have to keep ordering a ton of water, man. Why did we do this again? Like, I have to water all the damn time.
That's a lot of babysitting on those ones if you're hand watering all the time.
I mean, if you're growing a plant in such a small container, you really do need to water multiple times per day.
Oh, yeah,
trying to grow, pretty much regardless of media, especially in a media like Coco. And, if you're trying to grow any kind of decent sized plant, which, of course, everybody took this challenge as I want to grow the biggest plant I possibly can in a solo cup. So yeah, that's been fun. And we were thinking about what to do in the New Year's Grow Challenge. And we were talking about the menu and thinking about all the different food things. And I'm thinking like, okay, let's do the 1 cola. That'll be like our beverage, our 1 cola to go along with our main course. So, it kind of fits together, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I haven't decided what size container I'm going to grow my 1 cola plant in. Mm-hmm. I haven't decided entirely when I'm going to start my 1 cola plant. So we decided that we want people to try to flip the 1 cola plants on Valentine's Day. And I got one of the community members is sort of organizing this challenge, and he wants the rule to be you got to start the plant at least in January. I think a lot of people will try to start really late because you're gonna, the plant's gonna get really tall if you don't.
Yeah.
You're directing all the growth into one stem, so it's I'm looking forward to that. And I'm sure it sounds fun enough to everybody already, but we've got some amazing prizes lined up that we're going to be giving away in the New Year's Grow Challenge. I have LED grow lights from Mars Hydro. I'm going to give away FC3000 right at the beginning of the New Year's Grow Challenge. I'm going to be giving away one of the new My Grow arrays during the Grow Challenge. I'm going to be giving away one of the Photon Tech X series fixtures, probably the Photon Tech X 465 watt, which is just a beautiful high efficiency grow light for a 4x4 tent. We got some fans from AC Infinity that we're going to be giving away. Just a bunch of like top-notch quality prizes that are really participation prizes. This is just, being involved, updating your journal. We do giveaway drawings. People get, drawing numbers, and we use a lottery to determine who wins. But it's been a lot of fun in our current challenge. And I think we're going to have even more fun in the New Year's Grow Challenge. So everybody come on over, sign up, cocoforcannabis.com/challenge. You can read all about the groups, see all about the prizes, and go ahead and sign up.
I love it, man. That sounds so fun, especially right now, like a lot of us, well, maybe not me in particular, but a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands with, just the state of things in the world and stuff. So what a great way to like, if you need something to do, you need like some sense of socialization or community, even though it's online, it's like still really fun, and everyone's just kind of bouncing off each other and having a good time, it sounds like, with these, and then the cool prizes too. That's super cool, man. Thanks for doing that, man, and making that available for people.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. And it's free. It's free. There's no cost. There's no obligation. There is no catches. All we really want is to grow together. We'd love you to keep a journal in the forum. I mean, that's like the catch. That's the other side of it.
Sure.
A lot of people know, they sign up to keep their journals for a while or whatever. We're just trying to create community. I mean, that's really what it's all about. Create that structure of support for everybody. Create that community that you can share your successes, you can share your anxieties, you can share your abject terror and panic with, and it's really helpful to have that community around you. I don't know if I've said this on your show before, but, I work with farmers in Central America and Southern Mexico. And one of the notable things about all of the farmers that I work with is they are part of a community. They all are part of a community. They know their fellow farmers. They get help from their fellow farmers. And, when we grow our cannabis indoors, we often don't know our fellow farmers, and we often have a harder time getting help from our fellow farmers and in those kinds of situations. So, that's one of the main driving sort of forces for me behind this, is creating that community of farmers.
Yeah. You know what I love about it too, man, is that like, because just there's a lot of people struggling right now, so I can't help but think of stuff like this. But, a lot of people are, naturally we are competitive, right? Humans, like a lot, there's just some natural competitiveness in there, and it like, it will come out in one way or another,
Yep.
And so for some
I would
people,
argue though that we're not just naturally competitive. We can be competitive. We also can be collaborative.
Sure.
And we're very good at doing both of those things. We're actually very good at being collaborative. Humans, more than any other creature, excel at collaboration. We're also very good at being competitors, but I think we should recognize both of our strengths.
Sure. Yeah, I love that, man. Yeah, where I was going with it is just this idea of like using that in a fun way, in a positive way, rather than kind of burying that and letting it come out and maybe just going around and being a troll and being judgmental about people. It's super cool, man. Just that outlet. So
I think about that a lot. I really do. And a lot of this comes again from my background with sort of working with farmers and studying collaborative labor systems and how to motivate people to cooperate and all of that. And competition is dangerous in that way, because it can fight against where the collaboration instincts. But there are ways to successfully harness it, to sort of make it work hand in hand with collaboration. So you just have to do it intentionally. And we think a lot about that. So for example, we give prizes for like best journal, but not for best grow, right? we're fine with people sort of having a friendly competition about keeping the best journal, but we don't want people sort of, one of the things that happens in competition is you can win when other people lose. And that doesn't translate well in our scenarios, right? Like you as a home grower, you don't care really whether you grow more or less than me. You sort of care mostly about how much you grow and whether it meets your needs. So staying sort of focused on those goals and helping everybody sort of stay focused on those goals. I don't think there's any need to have a competition about, oh, I can grow more than you, type of a situation.
Yeah.
But to have, competitions to have like the best photo or just something along those lines. And we are doing a best party cup plant. And we talked about this, like, is that going to create the wrong kind of competition? And we decided it was enough of a sort of a stunt thing that it wouldn't erode the spirit of collaboration that we're really trying to promote. And to just, to be aware of that, the collaboration can be undermined by competition, but you can sort of include some elements of it, gameplay and other things like that sort of add to the fun of it. So I agree with you. And I certainly try to approach that with a lot of intention.
Yeah, I respect that a lot, man, because, you're people look up to you in the community. And so I feel that you're being responsible with what you have. And so kudos to you. I like that, man. I look up to that.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll be able to join us in either the New Year's Grow Challenge or one of these challenges. It would be a lot of fun to pull you and your whole audience in and, just grow the community.
Yeah. Well, if I had a tent, I would grow a photo period with you guys, but I don't have a tent right now. And I'm only growing autoflower, so I don't know how that would work.
We grow autos. Autos are welcome.
Okay.
Photos are welcome. Clones
cool.
are welcome. Any plant, any strain, any breeder. A lot of the ideas that we've had in the past have been like, well, let's do a specific strain and have everybody grow. And that just makes it too difficult to join. It creates too much of an obstacle for growers to join. So literally every grower is welcome. Regardless of what you're growing, we have a group that you'll fit into. If you can't get the timing exactly right, we'll be flexible about that. But the idea is to, just get everybody and make everybody feel welcome in the community.
Well, in that case, I might have to consider following through with it this time.
Yeah, like we do the autos photo thing. We even do the spring Autoflower challenge, and when we do the spring Autoflower challenge, we have a photo period group. Because there's some people that want to be in the challenge, even though it's the Autoflower challenge, they still want to grow photos. Right. So we're like, all right, we'll create the photo period group in the Autoflower challenge. But
that's cool. Hey, whatever works, man. That's super cool to do.
Exactly. Create a place for every grower. That's really ultimately what it's all about. And it's actually really interesting. We got a couple of sets of growers that I'm aware of that one of them is going to grow photo periods and one of them is going to grow autos of ostensibly the same strain. So it'll be really interesting to be able to see those two growers growing side by side and seeing sort of how the plants turn out and how the timeline of it all turns out and all of that. That's one of the coolest parts. If you're sort of a connoisseur of home grow, going through these challenge journals is really incredible because we have dozens of people growing oftentimes the same strain or, similar strains in the same setup or different strains with whatever. I mean, just so many different little things you can see and notice and different styles of growing and all of that. It's really an interesting sort of set of data.
Yeah, I love it, man. So should we kind of shift gears and get into some of these questions, do you think?
Yeah, we got some interesting questions sent in that we were going to review in this episode, huh?
Yeah, and I know that that we got in quite a bit, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover them all. So, but we've got a few here that are really good. And
I'm telling you, Chad, that's my problem with podcasts is we never seem to cover as much material as we lay out to, but we'll do our best. Yeah, we'll get through some of it.
yeah. Well, and that's the point of just releasing, little bits at a time, weekly and throughout different podcasts, and the information will get out there eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll get started here. Kevin would like to know, how do you start your seeds in cocoa, and at what point do you start watering and feeding nutrients?
Okay. Well, first, I would tell Kevin, I have a pretty good article on this that I would recommend everybody check out. My seedlings article. I have a germination article, and then I have the how to grow seedlings in cocoa core, which I think if you're going to be trying to grow seedlings in cocoa core, it's a really good place to start, at least. But to sort of try to answer the questions, the first question he asked is, how do you start seeds in cocoa? And I guess my most direct answer to that is I don't. I start seeds outside of cocoa, and I'll eventually transplant them into the cocoa. So my germination, and I explain this in the germination article, we can find on cocoforcannabis.com. I scuff seeds, I soak seeds for just a couple hours. I sprout them in wet paper towels, and then I grow the sprouts out in jiffy pellets, which are peat. So once the root grows out of the jiffy pellet, I will transplant that up into a seedling pot with cocoa. And that's sort of the first time the plants hit cocoa. They're usually 5 days old or so from the seed getting wet. And, you can start seeds directly in cocoa, but it's challenging. Those first 5 days are sort of challenging to start seeds in cocoa. You really want to be watering at that point, or having the seed exposed to very low EC water. During germination, ideally you use distilled water, or reverse osmosis or other filtered, really low EC water. And the problem with that is if you're in cocoa, you'll eventually create a problem with a cation exchange with calcium and magnesium. You won't be keeping the cocoa fully buffered, and your little seedling, as it's growing up in the cocoa, is going to really likely run into CalMag issues, calcium and magnesium deficiencies. So it's easier to just start plants, get them up to the point where they can take salty water, essentially, before you put them into the cocoa. And that way, as when they're in cocoa, you're always giving the cocoa in the plant water with nutrients. Specifically, at the earliest stage, you're giving them water with CalMag to keep the cocoa buffered, to keep the cocoa satisfied. Mm-hmm. So once I have like my little 5-day-old plant it's got its cotyledons open, it has the tip of its root coming out of the bottom of the jiffy pellet, I will prepare the cocoa, buffer it, rinse it out, all of that, and then I will pre-fertigate the cocoa with my entry-level sort of nutrient blend for seedlings that they're first entering cocoa. It's my seedling blend mix diluted to 400 EC. And I pre-fertigate, so I soak the cocoa in that, and then I add the jiffy pellet with the little sprout in it, and I fertigate with that seedling mix diluted to 400, usually for the first day, And then I dilute the seedling mix less and less each day until I get the electrical conductivity. Over the next 4 or 5 days, I work the electrical conductivity up to 700-800, up towards 1,000 by the end of that seedling stage.
Okay. Man, you're so thorough, dude.
That's why we can only do like 2 questions.
I love it, man.
It's a 50-50 deal. But that was good. I think that's the question. And again, Kevin, check out the seedlings article. I really, if you thought that was a thorough answer, I have like a even more thorough answer to that question with example timelines of 2 different actual seeds and what I did with them almost hour by hour through the first couple of weeks to really give you that sort of play-by-play take on how to get seeds through that. That stage, as you tell me, I went on long enough, I'll go on longer here, Chad.
Go for it.
That stage for Coco is the toughest. By far, the seedling stage is the toughest in Coco. And it's really after that you start to realize all of the benefits of growing in Coco. So we try to get through the seedling stage. We try to keep the plants as healthy and happy sort of as possible. It's very common to run into slight calcium, slight magnesium deficiencies, a little bit of a wavy leaf and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But if you can sort of get through that stage, the plants do fine once they reach the sort of early vegetation stage. But I understand Kevin's question because it is a bit of a touchy time there among their seedlings.
Yeah. No, I love it. Thank you for providing such a thorough answer, man. That's good stuff. I just want to mention too, like, because I'm constantly not constantly, I don't want to say that, but I often go to your website and like go search for a certain article and just copy the link and just message it back to somebody who asks me a question. So I just want to let people know, like, there's this plethora of information on cocoforcannabis.com that goes deep into stuff like this. If you guys, if anybody wants to check it out. Cool. As you mentioned, I just want to encourage people to actually go check it out. Like go to the website and check it out because there is a lot of information there. And you could just learn a lot, different, everything from what we're talking about now to grow lights and everything else, so.
Thank you, Chad. And thanks for sharing those links. We always appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, thanks for having the info there, dude, for
Absolutely.
us to chew on. Awesome. Well, let's move on to a buddy of mine, Rasta K. I know he grows in Coco. And this is a good question because I was curious when I watch him grow and do this. So he would like to know about wet-dry cycles with Coco. He says, I've heard many different styles from letting the cocoa dry out before feedings to, which I myself have never heard that, but to never letting the cocoa dry out and to do high frequency watering. I personally have done both methods, and now I only water to runoff and won't water feed again until the bag is dry and I can easily pick up the bag or the pot.
Yep.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, the first thing I have to say is I'm really curious about how Rasta K is fertilizing. Mm-hmm. Because the problem with letting the cocoa dry out has nothing to do with water. It has to do with the concentration of salts. It has to do with the fertilizers. So if you're fertigating and you let the cocoa dry out, you're going to be creating toxic root conditions for the plants. With certain cocoa grows that are dry amended, you can and even times should let the cocoa sort of dry out a little bit more depending on how you're fertilizing. So one of the really important things to consider with all of this is when we're talking about watering, watering is more than just watering. Even if you're not fertigating, fertigating is putting the nutrients and dissolving them right into the irrigation water. But even if you're dry amending, the way that you water affects nutrient uptake, it affects nutrient availability and solubility. And so it's important to not just be sort of thinking about the water itself. Cocoa in particular holds a lot of plant available water. So high frequency fertigation is not about keeping a lot of water in the cocoa. Mm-hmm. We fertigate with high frequency to maintain all of the variables within pretty tight ranges. So the electrical conductivity, just as one variable, is a measure of the salinity of the water, essentially. And before we give it to the plants, before we provide it to the cocoa, right, we can measure the electrical conductivity, we can measure all the other variables, mm-hmm. and really get it to be perfect, exactly what we want. As soon as we give it to the plant, and sort of put it into the environment like that, it starts to change. As the plant it takes up water, as the plant takes up nutrients, as water evaporates from the plant, as water evaporates from the pot and transpires from the plant, the electrical conductivity that is in the root zone is no longer what we had measured carefully and provided, right? It's changed from that. And the longer that you let the plant go between waterings, the more it will change. Mm-hmm. Electrical conductivity specifically almost always goes up when you leave it, because the plant will take water faster than it takes nutrients, which causes the sort of concentration of nutrients in the remaining water to spike. So those are the challenges with infrequent fertigation, and that's the reason that we do high frequency fertigation. It's not really about maintaining the moisture percentage, it's about maintaining the electrical conductivity in a tight range, maintaining the pH in a tight range, and providing really the optimal nutrient element ratio. Those are the main variables that we're worried about sort of refreshing. And so we're essentially just topping off periodically. When you let the cocoa dry out, you're removing more water than salts. So the root zone will become sort of too saline for the plant. And that can really adversely affect uptake. It affects uptake particularly of calcium early as EC starts to spike. You can get other kinds of sort of almost lockout situations from that as well. So it's a dangerous game to play. Letting it dry out would be my basic argument. The advantage of letting if you're well set up, I think there aren't many advantages of letting the cocoa dry out. Cocoa maintains adequate oxygen in the root zone, especially under a high frequency fertigation regime, to really, you can avoid hypoxic conditions in the root zone for the roots. They won't run out of oxygen, which is the main reason that you need to not do high frequency fertigation in like a soil-based media, is because it will create hypoxic conditions for the roots. Mm-hmm. That's not a huge concern. If that is a concern for you, you can add additional aeration. You can grow in smaller pots. You can grow in taller pots. You can do other things that sort of improve the ability of the cocoa to hold on to oxygen. But I think if you're fertigating, it's dangerous to let the cocoa dry out. If you're dry amending, I think dry amending is also a tricky game to play, but I am aware that there are reasons to allow the cocoa to dry out, as Rostake is sort of suggesting there. But high frequency fertigation is really the reason that cocoa is a hydroponic miracle that it is. It's the reason that the cocoa core is as popular for these applications as it is, because it has these unique properties that enable high-frequency fertigation. And high-frequency fertigation has been recognized for decades, really, in horticulture and sort of larger in agriculture, as being the most efficient way to grow crops. The problem is there are often structural limitations that prevent high-frequency fertigation. But that's basically the whole drive behind hydroponics, behind these kinds of hydroponic media, is to be able to sort of have more frequent input on the variables that matter.
Yeah, that's kind of, I guess that's a benefit of growing in cocoa too, is that you can, it's almost like if you're, because I know that Raw Decay feeds, just normal nutrients, popular nutrients and things like that, salt-based
mixed in with
nutrients.
The water every
yes exactly.
Yeah, that's a dangerous game. I wonder, it'd be interesting to chat with him about sort of specific things, like what EC he's running, what his runoff EC is, if he measures that, how long he really waits in between waterings. I'd have interesting questions that to probe about that at different stages of the grow too.
Yeah, you guys will have to maybe connect or something.
Yeah, but you can do things like that. But I would suggest that my message is that the benefit of cocoa really comes from its ability to handle high frequency fertigation. I mean, that's why I think at least cocoa is sort of as popular as it is. And if you're not doing it with high frequency fertigation, then you're sort of not taking advantage of that tremendous benefit. There are other benefits of cocoa in other applications, like as a soil amendment, it's really good to retain water, for example. But that's not why we're growing in like 100% cocoa or cocoa perlite mixes. The cocoa perlite mix thing is really all about high frequency. Yeah,
it's almost like a hybrid hydroponic type thing almost, right?
It's a style of hydroponic growing.
Yeah, okay.
Deep water culture is another style of hydroponic growing. A lot of people just sort of think DWC is hydro. But there are lots of different styles of hydro. DWC is one, cocoa is one, like NFT, there's lots of different.
Okay.
Growing in rock wool is hydro. You could grow in pure perlite is hydroponic.
Yeah. I guess I would just, if I was to grow in cocoa, and this is just my layman logic, but I would say that if it's working for him, fine, but you're probably not getting the most out of what you could, though, being that you are already in cocoa. If you're going to let it dry out, if it was me, I would just stick with soil then. Let it dry out and water it, and let it dry out and water it. But that's just my own personal.
Because to be honest with you, there are some downsides to cocoa. The main downside that we have to manage is the calcium issue, the CalMag issue. Really, it's calcium and magnesium. And we manage that because it's worth it to get the benefits of the sort of incredibly rapid, vigorous growth. On an infrequent fertigation, I think you'd be better off probably having a better buffered media. That's sort of the other side of the high frequency fertigation is it helps keep the cocoa buffered. We're always adding CalMag to our nutrient water, sort of a bonus dose of CalMag to the nutrient water in cocoa. And we're giving it to the cocoa all the time. And that's really just to keep the cocoa satiated, to keep it fully buffered. If you're watering less frequently, there's going to be less sort of total calcium available to keep the cocoa buffered.
I got you. I won't say that I fully understand it, but I think I grasp what you're saying.
Yeah, cocoa basically just eats a large portion of the calcium that you provide.
Yeah, I remember talking about that.
And if you don't provide enough calcium, it creates a deficit.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the problem that I was talking about during the seedlings, right? So if you start your seeds in cocoa for like 5 days, you're not going to be able to give CalMag to that cocoa. And that's going to create a deficit. And when the plant starts looking for the CalMag or the calcium and the magnesium, it's going to be like in competition with the cocoa, which is also trying to get that calcium and magnesium. And when they're tiny little plants, you can't give a lot because that would just toast them. So you were limited in the amount of a dose you have to give. And man, if the cocoa is demanding too much, if you've created a big deficit, your little plant's going to suffer, right? So that's why I don't put the seeds into the cocoa at that point when I'm not able to be giving the cocoa the CalMag.
That makes sense. Gotcha.
Yeah. It's just cocoa is hungry for CalMag. You can think of it that way. It's always sort of looking for CalMag, and the hunger doesn't go away. So if it gets, it needs to like satisfy that hunger eventually.
Yeah, I remember on a previous episode you were chatting about the importance, like if your especially if your cocoa isn't pre-buffered, how the importance of buffering it and getting it ready like that because of that CalMag issue.
Yeah. So just a little bit more on this since I'm talking about it.
Sure.
Each cation exchange site is pretty stable. So the cation exchange sites are little like docking stations. You can think about them on the surface of the cocoa fiber. And those little docking stations usually come with a sodium or a potassium cation, which are only weakly held at that position. In the presence of calcium, which has a double charge, the potassium or the sodium will get knocked off and the calcium will get attached to that docking station. When it's attached to calcium or magnesium, it's a pretty stable linkage. It's not going to sort of lose that calcium. The reason we need to continue to give calcium and magnesium to the cocoa as we're growing is because the cocoa is constantly exposing new cation exchange sites as it breaks down. So as the cocoa sort of breaks down, it exposes new sites, which then want that calcium or that magnesium cation, and they'll take it right out of the water. So you give water with calcium and magnesium, the cocoa just grabs it, and the plant never even has a chance. And that's why plants grown in cocoa often end up with calcium and magnesium deficiencies. But if you keep the cocoa satisfied, then the cocoa is sort of satisfied. It's like having a hungry pit bull or something, right? If you like give it enough food, then it'll just like lay in the corner and be quiet.
I gotcha. Totally makes sense, man. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, no worries. Absolutely. Fun stuff.
Yeah,
all right,
man,
what do we got?
Are
we done with, we got those
Okay,
questions.
yeah. So that was for Ross Decay. Let's move on to Captain Knots, I think it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Why is it that when I mix the nutrients to the Cocoa for Cannabis nutrient chart, my EC is always lower than the chart says? I've been using diluted water.
Distilled, he says.
Distilled, I'm sorry.
Diluted. Yeah.
What are you diluting that with?
I love it when people partially answer their own questions right after answering it. So that's a small part of it. The nutrient schedule is really sort of, it's an estimate for what you should arrive at, but it makes a couple of assumptions. It does assume that you're starting with low EC water, but there's probably about 50 EC in the schedule just for the starting water. So if you're starting with 0 EC water, like distilled water, then you would expect, if you follow the nutrient schedule exactly, to end up about 50 points underneath my targets. The bigger thing that throws people off of my ranges, though, is I list a range of CalMag doses. And the EC targets are calculated based on the top of that range. So they're based on the full dose for the CalMag. And growers often realize that they can reduce the dose of the CalMag and sort of operate at a lower point within the range that I advise. And that means that they'll undershoot the EC targets. There's one exception to that, and this is an adjustment that needs to be made to the chart, is the early bloom newts come in a little bit under electrical conductivity of what the chart says is the target. There's no two ways to think about that. The element ratio, the recipe that's there at a slightly lower electrical conductivity is perfectly fine for this stretch. Like, you don't need to like increase the electrical conductivity if that's sort of the issue that you have. The way I'm going to adjust that, I'm going to increase the dose slightly of the base nutrients, and lower the EC target slightly in the chart. Really sort of minor adjustments at the edges there, to sort of bring the chart more into alignment for more growers. But it's not going to be that big of an issue. This is Captain Knots. If the things that I've said so far, Captain Knots, seem to be like, okay, yeah, that accounts for the difference that I'm seeing, then great. If you're sitting at home thinking, oh, hell no, man, my numbers are like 500 less than yours, then there's some other sort of bigger issue involved here. One thing that potentially can happen that leads to much lower electrical conductivity readings than you would expect is if the nutrients, for some reason or another, fall out of solution. If they're not dissolving properly in the solution, they won't be picked up. That's unlikely. So hopefully Captain Knots is sort of coming in 50 or 75 or 100 sort of microsiemens underneath my numbers. And yeah, I sort of understand that. It's partly because you're starting with 0 EC water. It's partly probably because you're not running the maximum dose of CalMag. And if it's the early bloom newts, we are aware of that issue.
Gotcha. Hope that helps you out, Captain Knots.
Hopefully. Somebody else may have that issue. Sometimes people come up with this. It's actually, I've been pretty happy with how few questions we get about the nutrient chart relative to how many people who seem to be following it. There are a couple of issues. One of them I mentioned, the early bloom newts are a little bit light. The other issue is the dose of cool bloom, especially later towards in the bloom schedule, is too aggressive, and I intend to scale that back. Some plants can handle those doses, but enough plants can't that we're going to recommend lower doses of the bloom booster. Gotcha.
Man, yeah, EC, that's something that's just still way over my head.
It's easy.
I know.
So really, the 2-second EC, it's just salinity. It's just how salty the water is. So like ocean water has a really high EC, river water has a less EC, and distilled water has 0 EC, right? It's just how much stuff is in the water. And it matters because if the water is really salty, the plant can't get it by osmosis.
Right. That's what I was wondering. Like, because
it doesn't matter. People think it's all about the nutrients that are there. We don't measure EC to measure the quantity of nutrients. We measure EC to ensure that the water isn't too salty. Because if the water is too salty, the plant can't drink it. Right. There is a limit to the salinity at which the plant will still be able to absorb water. And we need to stay within that limit.
Okay, so man, if you're growing in Coco and you're fertigating, this is obviously, that's pretty important. It's better to measure EC than ppm probably. I know we kind of covered that.
ppm is so ppm is, when you get a ppm meter, the ppm meter actually measures electrical conductivity and then puts that into a calculation to display a ppm value.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay.
ppm meters and EC meters are both measuring EC. They're both measuring the electrical conductivity. They send a little electrical signal through between the sensors through the water. The ppm calculations is just a calculation where they try to say, okay, if this is the electrical conductivity, this must be how much stuff is dissolved in that water. So the message I have is basically you're measuring the same thing. The reason EC is the better way to talk about it is because that's why it's important. We're measuring the electrical conductivity because it's the electrical conductivity that affects osmosis and the uptake of water by plants in the root zone.
Mm-hmm.
ppm is the proper way to dose nutrients. If you're thinking about how many, what ppm of nitrogen and phosphorus and all of that. But that isn't why we're measuring it. When we're measuring it for growing in cocoa, we're not measuring our EC or our ppm to understand the component elements.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it doesn't do a very good job of telling you the component elements. You don't know how much nitrogen is in the water by measuring EC. You don't know how much phosphorus is in the water by measuring EC. The only way we as home growers know how much nitrogen and how much phosphorus and all the rest of that stuff is by following a recipe and using products with guaranteed analysis ratios in them, and following that recipe. We're not measuring how much nitrogen is in the water, so we shouldn't be talking about it like it's a ppm value. We're measuring it for electrical conductivity reasons, and I think it becomes more confusing, but it is the same thing. So if the meter that you have only shows ppm, most of those meters are on the 500 scale. So you can just double that number, and that gets you pretty close to microsiemens of electrical conductivity. So like 800 ppm would be 1,600 microsiemens or of electrical conductivity, or 1.6 millisiemens.
Okay. I'm getting
so
it.
There's an
I
easy
like
conversion. If that's what you can measure, then you can
Okay.
still work with it. But it is important, I think, to sort of understand what you're measuring and why.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess in the next question, it does kind of shift over to ppms. Are you ready to take that
Yeah.
leap?
Yeah, which is sort of the same. So this is what ppm levels do you want to be during the flush period?
Right, litty titties.
Right. And so people are just using ppm and EC interchangeably, essentially here. And then there's another question about the flush too. Is the flush at the end necessary when using organic dry amendments?
Right, that's from Red Eye
So
Tony.
let's step back and to be able to sort of address both of these questions, and let's think just briefly about what the flush is probably doing.
Okay.
Well, first, what growers think it's doing, and then what it probably is doing, if it's doing really much of anything at all.
I've been waiting for this moment.
A lot of growers think that they are reducing the concentration of fertilizers in the flowers of their plant. Right?
Yeah, that's the in one way, and in one. That's the sorry.
And you hear all sorts of stuff like that. You're like, well, if it's not flushed, you like there's extra phosphorus, and you can see it sparking.
They'll frame it to basically get that across in one way or another using different words and stuff.
The underlying theory seems to be that we are removing excess nutrients from the buds.
Yes, exactly, so that they're not harsh, etc., and for all these different reasons that people claim. Yes.
We know for a scientific fact that is not true. Nothing is removed from the buds like that. We're not flushing away any excess nutrients that have been sort of deposited in the flowers at all. That doesn't happen. That's actually not where the nutrients go anyways. Nutrients that we provide are like vitamins. They're not like food. They don't go directly to growing the plant. They don't generally get deposited directly in the flowers. They go to the sites of photosynthesis, and they're necessary elements for certain of the synthetic functions of the plant. So the nutrients usually go to the leaves, where they are then used in the manufacture of photosynthate. That photosynthate then is distributed to other parts of the plant. So we know that flushing does not reduce sort of the concentration of nutrients in the buds, which is what people think it does. And we know that the concentration of nutrients that are sort of in the buds isn't going to be different whether the plant was flushed or not flushed. And so because of that scientific sort of knowledge, you'll come across a lot of people that will say the flush is bogus, and there's no science to support the flush, and everybody's wrong, and all of this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll push back on that too.
Okay.
And I'll say, I think we have enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that there is something going on here. Mm-hmm. But it's not what we think is going on. Right?
Okay.
It's not that the concentration of fertilizers is being reduced in the flowers, but something else might be happening as a result of the flush at the end of the cycle. And there's a couple of good explanations for potential sort of paths that could be generating a response. Mm-hmm. What we do when we flush is we dramatically and suddenly lower the electrical conductivity and remove essentially the plant's ability to access nutrients through the roots.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
That is a shock to the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And that shock alone, that sudden change, may generate a response in the plant that has a beneficial sort of perceived benefit for us as growers.
Okay. Which would be?
It may trigger the plant to produce extra cannabinoids or extra resins or something like that. That shock to the plant system may generate a response in the plant that produces beneficial results.
Okay.
And there's a lot of evidence of that, actually, not of that specifically, but that strategically stressing the plant can increase the production of cannabinoids.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, when you say it increases the production of cannabinoids or cannabinoids, do you mean like trichomes, or do you just mean the actual
within the trichomes? Probably not the number of trichomes, but sort of what's going on within the trichomes.
Okay, that makes sense to me. That I can accept because it's scientific, but it's also logical. What doesn't make sense to me is how people purposely stress their plants at the end to supposedly boost more trichomes, like let's say with an ice flush or what. I know we're getting off topic, but
they're all related things.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like if you are producing these last minute trichomes, you're chopping the plant down like a day or two later.
Yeah, I wouldn't think of it as like additional numbers of trichomes. You're probably looking at the activity that's going on within each individual trichome, right? So if you think of the trichomes like the apples hanging from an apple tree or something, you're not going to suddenly get a whole lot more apples, but you might get like juicier, tastier, plumper apples or something like that, right? By doing something like that at the end of the grow. And I think that that's one potential path, is that it's literally the shock to the plant. Mm-hmm. That if we assume that there is a positive impact of flushing, one potential pathway for that impact is that it was just the shock of suddenly losing its access to fertilizers that triggered a response in the plant.
Okay.
The other potential path is that it's simply the exposure to a much lower electrical conductivity for the last period of its life, for the last few days or whatever it is. When you lower the electrical conductivity in the water, it makes it much easier for the plant to get water. The plant is able to sort of cycle more water through itself. This is actually an interesting thing that you can observe as a gardener if you have good equipment. When you go into the flush, you will notice an increase in relative humidity.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Because the plants will be able to move more water through themselves.
And then, so is there a benefit to that at the end of the grow?
There could be.
And what would that look like?
It's tougher to really understand what that would look like. That's
like allow someone a longer drying time or something?
Having easier access to water. There are ways to imagine how that could lead to sort of a favorable response to the plant.
Okay.
Those are the sort of two possibilities for this. I'm not entirely sure how the path on that would take, whether it would mean that sort of allocation of either photosynthate or nutrients was easier because of flow of movement was improved. When plants are moving more water through themselves, they're able to move other things around themselves easier. So it may be related to that. To be honest with you, if there is a benefit to the final flush, I lean towards it being shock related.
Okay. But it's safe to say, like, just kind of from a person who has some scientific foothold and foundation, it's safe to say that the idea of flushing your plant at the end to get rid of chlorophyll and to get rid of these chemicals in your buds is just bullshit, right?
That's bullshit. Yeah. That's bro science. We call it bro science.
Bro science. I love it.
Yeah, there's no sort of truth to that, and there's evidence that shows that there are scientific experiments that shows that that's not the case. That once those nutrients are sort of uptaken and laid down, especially the ones that are laid down in the flowers, flowers are not sinks for anything, are not sources for anything nutrient-wise in plants. They are sinks. The stuff that ends up in the flower stays in the flower. The plant never reallocates it to any other location within the plant. Like you can do, for example, with leaves. Leaves become both sinks and they can be sources later on. So the plant may, lay down magnesium in a leaf and then say, oh no, I need that magnesium over here better. That there is no process for that from flowers. Flowers are only sinks. When stuff ends up in the flower, it stays there.
Makes total sense to me, man. And I'm glad to hear an opinion on it from somebody who has some clout other than just the bro science people like myself.
Yeah. But again, a lot of people that will tell you that argument, and that's the argument you get from most of the scientific minded folks about flushing. And I do want to tell them all, I'm like, look, but that doesn't mean that there's not some other benefit from this.
Sure.
I agree completely that what most people think happens during the flush does not actually happen. But like we've been talking about, some other things happen, and those may be beneficial. And it's possible to understand how those could be related to the really overwhelming anecdotal evidence that we have that suggests that flushing works.
Sure.
So now let's get back to these couple of questions about flushing. Sort of thinking about that. The first one was, what ppm levels do you want to be during the flush period? In terms of ppm, drop it as low as you can. In Coco, you should be able to get your ppm down under 200. That's an EC of under 400 pretty quickly. And since I am leaning strongly towards the opinion that it is the the shock aspect that generates the beneficial effect, I think the faster you can get the electrical conductivity down to that range, the better. So I usually try to do a pretty heavy flush at the beginning of my flush to sort of knock the bottom out of the EC quickly.
Okay.
That makes sense. The other question that was asked is it necessary to flush if you're using organic dry amendments? And I would say it's not. And again, it's not for the reason that you think. It's like, oh, because they're organic or something, I don't need to get rid of them. Right. You really can't. I mean, you're not going to be able to drop the electrical conductivity. You're not going to be able to provide the plain water in the same way that we can in a pure hydroponic sense, because there's nutrients in the media. Mm-hmm. So the thing that it's impossible to flush if you're growing in like a living soil or most forms of super soil and those forms of heavily amended media or living media. You're not going to be able to do that. So it's not just that it's not as it's not really possible to suddenly remove all forms of nutrients.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you'd just be saturating your soil basically, probably, huh?
Right. So it's not about giving the plant extra water. It's not about giving the plant even it's probably about suddenly cutting off the supply of fertilizers sends a shock signal to the plant. Right. And if you are in, heavily amended cocoa or heavily amended soil or something, you're just not going to be able to do that. It's just not one of the options that you have. But again, that's fine, because there's not a whole hell of a lot of evidence that this is actually very sort of beneficial. Mm-hmm. So I think we can make some other sort of conclusions about this. People are concerned oh, I won't smoke unflushed buds, or all of that is built on a false understanding of what happens during the flush. Perfect.
I love that, man. Thanks for clarifying that. I have been waiting to ask you that for a very long time. I'm glad somebody else asked it because I wanted to. That's so cool.
Indeed. Well, and I still practice the flush. I think that we can in cocoa. It's pretty easy to flush plants at the end in cocoa. I see absolutely no downside to the practice. Again, in cocoa, because it's just an easy flush to do. You're about to murder the plants anyways, so you can't screw it up really that badly at that point. So I still do it. But yeah, I mean, if you're growing in a media or in a situation where you can't, I definitely don't think it's the end of the world. I really don't.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's see. We got a last question here from Patrick, and I think it's a good one to end with. He asks, are there plans to expand the lighting section reviews on the site sometime in the near future?
Absolutely. I think I probably expanded it even since Patrick asked that question.
Magical.
I'm not sure entirely, but I did just post my most recent grow light review on Sunday. Let's see, that was Sunday the 16th of November here. I did the part test and review of the giant, and I say that with sort of respect and admiration of this fixture, but the giant Grower's Choice ROI E720, which is a beast of a light designed for a 5x5 grow tents. Did very well in the par testing. Was really sort of a fun fixture to play around with. So I just published that one. Let's see, last month I added a couple of new fixtures to the Grow Light Guide as well. I added the Vipar Spectra XS1500, which is a really cool little light for seedlings. It's a really cool little light for a 2x2 tent. And I also did a test report of the Mars FC3000, which earned my sort of top recommendation for the 3x3 foot space. Yeah, I've had the MyGrow array in the test rig recently. I just tested, oh my God, a giant, enormous light that Mars made, the SP6500. I'm struggling to figure, this is a beast of a light, man.
Sounds like it, dude.
It's the same basic size as the SP3000.
Oh, is it?
But it's 650 watts instead of 300 watts. And I'm sorry, the SP3000 is already a lot of light for that form factor.
Yeah.
This thing is insane, man. I ran a test with it. They suggest it for a 3x5 coverage, which I think is insane. The calculator rates it for over 20 square feet.
Wow.
And this is the first time I've had a company tell me, oh, it's a 15 square foot light. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, no, it's not. It's like significantly more light than that.
Wow.
I put it in the 5x3 test area, and at 50 centimeters, which is pretty high, I had 1,500 ppfd in the center.
Wow.
I couldn't get it high enough in a 5x3 to get the PFD down to 1,000. So it's a crazy light. I'm gonna write a review about how to use it for CO2 enriched grow space, I think.
Cool.
And also did a test with it out in a bigger area in a 5x4. Yeah, that's the light that has me sort of scratching my head lately. I'm like, wow. It's like too much light. It's like too much light for how big it is. So
wow.
It's won a lot of light. There's that one coming out. But yeah, no, I've been having a lot of fun doing these videos and sort of getting into. I find something new to explore in all of the videos about sort of the physics of light and interesting things that I've wondered about that I'm able to run little experiments on now. So one of the things that I did in the recent video for the Grower's Choice ROI 720, I ran it down at the height that maximized the usable ppf. So at the sort of the lowest height you would want to run it at, which was only 15 inches. And then I raised it up until I could get all of the edges and the corners up above the 500 mark, which was 7 inches higher, so 22 inches high. And then I compared those two maps, and it was really interesting to see sort of what happens with the light, how the distribution changes when you raise it up, and how much you lose in that exchange. You lose a little bit every time you raise the fixture up, but not as much as you might sort of think. And the distribution really improves. So it's fun to play around with those things and to get a better understanding and to sort of share a better understanding about all of these grow light physics. So for sure, that's in terms of content that I've been working on lately, about 80% of my content work lately has been in the grow light guide, working on updates to the grow light calculator now. I'm gonna do a couple of little refinements to some of those formulas. And yeah, keep testing and reviewing fixtures. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks for like doing that for us, man, because that's one thing in the grow world that changes rapidly is lighting, LED lighting especially. And so, you know, out of all the little different facets in growing, that's one thing that is just always changing, and you're always there testing and providing. And so thanks for doing that, man. We appreciate it. And also, thank you so much once again for giving us your time.
Oh, absolutely, Chad. It's been a pleasure to come on. A lot of fun doing the podcast with you. So thank you again for having me back. I hope the audience enjoys our episodes. I was happy and encouraged to see all the questions that they had sent in. So keep sending them in out there, you know, Autoflower podcast universe. And we'll get to do another one of these cool little Q&A sessions.
Right on, man. Well, I really do appreciate it, man.
Cool. Let me drop my, let me just remind growers about the New Year's Grow Challenge. We were talking about the top. Come grow together with us. You could win some of these cool lights that I'm testing, or just grow together. Just have that community. Share what you're doing. Show off your plants. Ask questions. All of that fun stuff. So sign up at cocoforcannabis.com/challenge. And we'll get started in January. Check out the Grow Light calculator that I was just talking about. Allows you to do all your own sort of analysis with your different Grow Light data. Get in that Grow Light guide, read through some of these test reports we've been talking about, read through some of our articles. If you come up with any questions during that process, then, send them on into Chad and we'll come back on and have another one of these fun episodes.
Sweet, man. And I'll make sure I link to all that in the show notes, the challenge, the calculator, and the guide. So if anybody wants to just go into the show notes of this episode, they could just click on the link and it'll just take them right there.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, man. I appreciate it, dude. Well, that does it for episode 48, ladies and gentlemen. Just a friendly reminder to follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter if you aren't already. Don't forget to register for the Coco for Cannabis New Year's Grow Challenge at Dr. Coco's website, cocoforcannabis.com. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to live out your values, to love your plants, and to love one another. See ya.
Nicotine, alcohol, good drugs. Coincidentally, tax drugs. Ooh, how does this fucking work?
The deadly narcotic. The dried leaves and berries are ground up and made into cigarettes by a simple hand machine. The deadly narcotic is thus quickly and easily prepared for its market. The sale of marijuana is even more difficult to detect and halt than the traffic in drugs such as opium, morphine, and heroin.